Greenfield, Ohio, a quiet suburban community where neighbors knew each other by name, and crime was typically limited to occasional vandalism or minor disputes. But on March 15, 2023, this peaceful facade was shattered when police responded to a 911 call from a concerned elementary school administrator. Cassidy Blackwood, age 4, had been absent from preschool for 3 consecutive weeks. The school's repeated attempts to contact her mother, Eliza Blackwood, had gone unanswered. What began as a routine welfare check quickly escalated into something far more sinister. Officer Devin Reynolds was first to arrive at the modest 2-story home on Sycamore Lane. The property showed signs of neglect, mail overflowing from the mailbox, newspapers piled on the front porch, and curtains drawn tight across every window. His knocks went unanswered, but something about the scene prompted him to circle the property. The back door was slightly ajar, Reynolds would later testify. I announced myself and entered under emergency circumstances, believing a child might be in danger. The interior of the Blackwood home told a disturbing story. Unwashed dishes filled the sink. Takeout containers littered the countertops. A layer of dust covered most surfaces, but it was the second floor that raised immediate alarms. In what was clearly a child's bedroom, Reynolds discovered a scene that would haunt the entire investigation. A small bed with rumpled pink sheets was stained with what appeared to be dried blood. A stuffed rabbit lay on the floor, one arm torn off. And on the wall, written in what laboratory tests would later confirm was red marker, not blood, were the words, "She's gone now." Within an hour, the Blackwood residence had been declared a crime scene. Detective Naomi Spencer arrived to lead the investigation, bringing 15 years of experience in homicide and child endangerment cases. The initial evidence pointed to something terrible having happened to the child, Spencer noted in her case files, but the absence of a body immediately complicated matters. Meanwhile, Eliza Blackwood was located at her workplace, a local insurance agency, where she'd been employed as a data entry clerk for the past 6 years. Co-workers described her as withdrawn and increasingly erratic in recent weeks, but none had suspected anything truly wrong. When confronted by authorities, Eliza's response was unsettlingly calm. "Is this about Cassidy?" she reportedly asked. "I've been meaning to call someone." Back at the Blackwood residence, forensic teams were methodically processing the scene. In addition to the blood evidence in the child's bedroom, investigators discovered a journal hidden between the mattress and box spring of Eliza's bed. The contents were disturbing, fragmented entries describing overwhelming frustration, sleep deprivation, and increasingly dark thoughts about motherhood. One entry, dated February 22nd, read, "Sometimes I think we'd both be better off if she just disappeared. I can't do this anymore." The final entry, from February 27th, contained just 4 words, "It's finally over now." No entry appeared after that date. In the bathroom, luminol testing revealed blood residue in the bathtub drain, despite evidence of recent, thorough cleaning. In the kitchen, a set of knives was found with one conspicuously missing. The garbage had been recently emptied, but the outdoor bin contained only standard household waste, nothing that could account for human remains. As day turned to evening, neighborhood canvassing painted a complex picture of the Blackwood household. Eliza was described variously as a devoted single mother and increasingly isolated. Multiple neighbors reported hearing intense arguments coming from the home in recent months, though none could confirm hearing a child's voice during these incidents. Particularly revealing was the testimony of Margaret Donahue, an elderly neighbor who lived directly across the street. "There was a night, must have been late February, when I heard the most awful screaming," she told investigators. "Not like an argument, more like someone in agony. It went on for maybe a minute, then stopped suddenly. I nearly called the police, but then I saw Eliza leave the house around midnight with a large duffel bag. She put it in her trunk and drove off. Returned maybe 2 hours later without it. Never saw the little girl after that." By nightfall, with no sign of Cassidy Blackwood and mounting evidence suggesting foul play, Eliza was taken into custody for questioning. During a 6-hour interrogation, her behavior further alarmed investigators. She alternated between periods of complete emotional detachment and brief moments of apparent confusion, asking repeatedly if Cassidy had been found yet, a question that contradicted her earlier statements, suggesting she knew what had happened to her daughter. When directly asked about Cassidy's whereabouts, Eliza offered a response that would become central to the prosecution's case. "She's gone. I took care of it. Isn't that what everyone wanted?" Search teams were dispatched to local wooded areas, focusing on locations along Eliza's known driving routes, and places mentioned in her personal papers. Cadaver dogs searched the property and surrounding neighborhood. The local pond was dragged. No trace of Cassidy Blackwood was found. As dawn broke on March 16th, District Attorney Raymond Hartwell made the decision to charge Eliza Blackwood with first-degree murder, despite the absence of a body. In a controversial move that would later be scrutinized, he cited the overwhelming circumstantial evidence and clear confession-like statements from the suspect. Public defender Tyler Mercer was assigned to Eliza's case. Upon meeting his client, he found her oddly cooperative yet detached from the gravity of her situation. She seemed to be operating in a fog, Mercer would later tell reporters. When I explained the murder charge, she nodded as if I'd just told her about a minor traffic violation. The preliminary hearing was scheduled with unusual speed, just 3 days after Eliza's arrest. Judge Warren Mitchell, known for his tough stance on crimes against children, presided over the case. The courtroom was packed with local residents and media, all captivated by the horrific allegations against a mother who, until recently, had no criminal record or history with Child Protective Services. As the prosecution presented the evidence collected thus far, the blood evidence, the journal entries, the neighbor testimonies, and Eliza's incriminating statements, Judge Mitchell's expression grew increasingly severe. When Eliza was brought before him, her blank expression and apparent lack of remorse seemed to confirm everything the community already believed about her. In what would become a pivotal moment in the case, Judge Mitchell broke judicial protocol by directly addressing the defendant before formal proceedings had concluded. "Ms. Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying throughout the hushed courtroom, "I have presided over many difficult cases in my career, but few have disturbed me as deeply as what you have allegedly done to your own child. As a parent myself, I cannot fathom such an act." Eliza's response was both unexpected and chilling. Looking directly at the judge, she replied in a voice just loud enough to be heard, "You don't understand, I had to protect her from myself." This statement, interpreted by the prosecution as an admission of guilt, further cemented public opinion against Eliza Blackwood. By the end of the preliminary hearing, Judge Mitchell had denied bail, citing both flight risk and public safety concerns. The case was fast-tracked for trial, with a date set just 6 weeks away, an unusually rapid timeline that some legal experts would later question. What no one in that courtroom knew, not the stern judge, not the determined prosecutor, not even Eliza's own attorney, was that the truth of the Blackwood case was far more complex and disturbing than anyone had yet imagined. And as Detective Naomi Spencer returned to the evidence locker that evening to review the case files one more time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been overlooked. What she would discover in the coming days would not only change the course of the investigation, but would shake the foundations of the entire judicial proceeding. The Blackwood case was about to take the first of many unexpected turns, revealing that sometimes the most terrifying truths lie not in what is found, but in what has been hidden from view all along. As the Blackwood case moved from investigation to prosecution, the community of Greenfield became increasingly invested in its outcome. Local news outlets provided daily updates, while residents placed stuffed animals and flowers at an impromptu memorial outside Eliza's home. The absence of Cassidy's body did nothing to diminish public certainty about her fate. If anything, it intensified the collective grief and outrage. District Attorney Raymond Hartwell, a man with political ambitions and a reputation for securing convictions in high-profile cases, took personal control of the prosecution. At 57, with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence, Hartwell had never lost a murder case in his 15-year tenure. Standing before the press on March 20th, he projected absolute confidence. While this case presents unique challenges, the evidence points to only one conclusion, Hartwell announced. Eliza Blackwood took the life of her 4-year-old daughter, attempted to conceal her crime, and has shown no genuine remorse for her actions. We will pursue justice for Cassidy with every resource available to us. Behind the scenes, however, the prosecution team faced significant obstacles. Without a body, they would need to rely heavily on circumstantial evidence and Eliza's own statements that, upon closer examination, contained troubling inconsistencies. The blood evidence from the child's bedroom, while substantial enough to indicate serious injury, was insufficient to prove death, and the murder weapon, presumed to be the missing kitchen knife, remained unrecovered. These challenges seemed of little concern to Hartwell, who proceeded with unusual haste. In a move that raised eyebrows among legal observers, He declined to present the case to a grand jury, instead filing direct charges based on the preliminary evidence. This strategic decision limited the defense's early access to the prosecution's full case and accelerated the timeline toward trial. Public defender Tyler Mercer found himself overwhelmed and underprepared. At just 32, with only 3 years of experience and a caseload of 67 active files, Mercer struggled to mount an effective defense. His requests for additional time to review evidence and consult experts were summarily denied by Judge Mitchell, who cited the interests of justice and closure for the community. Mercer's first meeting with Eliza in the county detention center lasted less than 30 minutes and yielded little useful information. Seated across from him in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, Eliza appeared physically present but mentally elsewhere. "Ms. Blackwood, I need you to help me understand what happened to Cassidy," Mercer pressed, growing frustrated with her vague responses. After a long pause, Eliza replied, "Some days I think she's gone, some days I'm not sure. Does that make sense to anyone?" This pattern of disjointed, contradictory statements continued throughout their limited preparation time. On some occasions, Eliza seemed to acknowledge causing harm to her daughter. On others, she asked when Cassidy would be returning from her safe place. Mercer considered pursuing a mental health evaluation, but hesitated, concerned it might further strengthen the prosecution's narrative of a mother who had lost control. When the trial began on April 25th, the courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Judge Warren Mitchell, presiding with rigid formality, made his personal investment in the case increasingly evident. His rulings consistently favored the prosecution, from evidentiary decisions to the questioning of witnesses. Each time Eliza entered the courtroom, his gaze followed her with undisguised contempt. Hartwell's opening statement painted a compelling narrative: a single mother, overwhelmed by the demands of parenthood, who finally snapped under pressure. He methodically presented the physical evidence, the blood-stained bedding, the journal entries, the missing knife, alongside neighbor testimonies about strange behavior and disturbing sounds. The prosecution particularly emphasized Margaret Donahue's account of Eliza leaving the house late at night with a duffel bag, suggesting this was when she disposed of Cassidy's body. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hartwell concluded, "sometimes the absence of evidence tells us more than its presence. Eliza Blackwood has made every effort to hide what she did to her daughter, but she couldn't hide the truth, not from her neighbors, not from investigators, and certainly not from herself." Throughout these proceedings, Eliza's demeanor remained disturbingly unchanged. She sat motionless at the defense table, her expression vacant, occasionally writing notes on a legal pad that, Mercer would later reveal, contained nothing but repetitive circles and fragmented phrases. Her apparent detachment from her own trial fueled public perception of her guilt and callousness. Mercer's defense strategy, limited by resources and time, focused on the prosecution's lack of definitive proof. "The state has presented theories and possibilities," he argued, "but not the evidence required for a conviction of this magnitude. Without Cassidy's body, without clear proof of death, we are being asked to make the gravest of judgments based on speculation." His cross-examinations attempted to highlight alternative explanations for the evidence. The blood could indicate injury rather than death. The journal entries reflected a struggling mother's dark thoughts, not actions. The missing knife could have been discarded for innocent reasons, but each line of questioning was met with sustained objections from Hartwell, many of which Judge Mitchell upheld. By the trial's 4th day, as the prosecution's case neared completion, a pattern had emerged that troubled even some who believed in Eliza's guilt. Judge Mitchell's interventions had become increasingly frequent and one-sided. During a particularly tense exchange, after Mercer questioned the thoroughness of the investigation, Mitchell addressed the jury directly. "The defense counsel's insinuations about investigative inadequacy are speculative and inappropriate," he stated, in clear violation of judicial protocol. "This court has full confidence in the professionalism of Greenfield's law enforcement." This comment, which would later feature prominently in appeals documentation, went unchallenged by Mercer, who appeared increasingly defeated by the trial's predetermined trajectory. On April 29th, as the prosecution prepared to rest its case, an unexpected development briefly disrupted the proceedings. Detective Naomi Spencer, scheduled to provide final testimony about the investigation's findings, requested a private meeting with the district attorney and Judge Mitchell. The content of this 40-minute closed-door discussion was not disclosed to the defense or the public, but when court resumed, Spencer's testimony was notably abbreviated, focusing only on established facts already in evidence. Later that afternoon, Eliza Blackwood was called to testify in her own defense, a high-risk decision that Mercer had strongly advised against. As she took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. For the first time since her arrest, some flicker of emotion crossed her features. Under Mercer's careful questioning, Eliza described her life with Cassidy, their daily routines, their financial struggles, their weekend visits to the local park. She spoke of increasing anxiety and sleepless nights, of bad thoughts that wouldn't go away, and of periods of time she couldn't clearly remember. But when asked directly about the night Cassidy allegedly disappeared, her testimony became fragmented and contradictory. "I put her to bed. I read her favorite story," Eliza stated, her voice suddenly childlike. "But she wouldn't stop crying. The crying was so loud in my head." "And then what happened, Miss Blackwood?" Mercer prompted gently. "Then it was quiet," she replied. "Everything was finally quiet." Hartwell's cross-examination was methodical and devastating. He walked Eliza through her inconsistent statements to police, her incriminating journal entries, her unexplained behavior in the weeks following Cassidy's disappearance. With each question, her responses became more disjointed, at times trailing off into silence or shifting into statements that seemed to come from an entirely different conversation. "Ms. Blackwood," Hartwell finally asked, "did you kill your daughter Cassidy?" After a long pause during which the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, Eliza looked up with an expression of genuine confusion. "Sometimes I think I must have," she whispered. "But then I remember the stairs and the door and the light I left on so she wouldn't be afraid." This cryptic statement, which meant little to anyone present, was immediately seized upon by Hartwell as further evidence of psychological gamesmanship. In his closing argument the following morning, he characterized Eliza as a manipulative individual attempting to evade responsibility through feigned confusion. Judge Mitchell's instructions to the jury emphasized that circumstantial evidence was sufficient for conviction if it established guilt beyond reasonable doubt. His tone and phrasing, later cited in appeals as inappropriately leading, left little question about his own conclusions in the matter. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Eliza showed no reaction. Judge Mitchell scheduled sentencing for the following week, denying Mercer's request for additional time to prepare mitigating evidence. What no one in that courtroom could have anticipated was that the Blackwood case, seemingly concluded, was about to reveal its most shocking secrets. Outside the courthouse, Detective Naomi Spencer watched the media coverage with growing unease. The nagging doubts that had troubled her throughout the investigation had crystallized into specific concerns serious enough that she had begun a quiet, unauthorized reinvestigation of key evidence. What she discovered would soon challenge everything the court had just decided, revealing that justice in the Blackwood case had been not only blind, but dangerously deaf to crucial whispers of truth. While Greenfield celebrated what most considered justice served, Detective Naomi Spencer found herself unable to share in the collective relief. At 43, Spencer had built her reputation on methodical investigation and attention to detail. Something about the Blackwood case had bothered her from the beginning, not just isolated inconsistencies, but a persistent sense that they were missing something fundamental. The evening after the verdict, Spencer sat alone in her modest apartment, case files spread across her dining table. Other detectives might have moved on to new assignments, but Spencer couldn't shake the feeling that they had rushed to judgment. She began systematically reviewing the evidence, this time without the pressure of public outrage or Hartwell's push for a quick resolution. "I've learned to trust my instincts," she would later explain in a sworn affidavit, "and my instincts were screaming that we hadn't found the whole truth." Spencer's first concern was the timeline established by the prosecution. If Eliza had harmed Cassidy in late February, as suggested by her journal entries, why had she maintained her normal work schedule, even earning praise from her supervisor for increased productivity? Phone records showed regular calls to pizza delivery and grocery services, with orders clearly sufficient for 2 people, continuing well into March. More troubling were discrepancies in the forensic evidence. The blood found in Cassidy's bedroom, while matching her type, showed patterns inconsistent with fatal trauma. The luminol reactions in the bathroom suggested thorough cleaning, but lab analysis had identified common household bleach rather than the more specialized products typically used in attempts to eliminate crime scene evidence. Then, there were Eliza's own statements. Contradictory, yes, but perhaps not in the way the prosecution had framed them. Reviewing the interrogation transcripts, Spencer noticed that Eliza's level of coherence fluctuated dramatically, not just between sessions, but sometimes within the same conversation. These weren't the calculated manipulations of someone attempting to mislead. They resembled something Spencer had encountered in previous cases involving severe psychological disturbance. The detective's concerns crystallized into action when she discovered a critical oversight in the initial investigation. In their focus on Eliza's movements and the physical evidence in the home, they had paid little attention to Cassidy's medical records. Spencer's request for these documents revealed a troubling pattern. Over the previous year, Eliza had taken Cassidy to 5 different medical facilities with various minor injuries. None of these incidents had triggered mandatory reporting. Each seemed plausibly accidental when viewed in isolation, but collectively, they hinted at either profound neglect or potential abuse. What struck Spencer as odd, however, was that each visit was meticulously documented in Eliza's personal calendar, with detailed notes about treatment recommendations and follow-up care. These aren't the actions of someone attempting to hide abuse, Spencer noted in her unofficial case log. They're either the actions of an exceptionally careful abuser, which contradicts everything else we know about Eliza's increasingly chaotic mental state, or they're the actions of a mother genuinely concerned about her child's welfare. Pursuing this thread, Spencer began contacting Eliza's extended family, connections that had been cursorily explored during the initial investigation. After several dead ends, she located Valerie Thornton, Eliza's estranged sister, living in Cincinnati. Their conversation proved revelatory. Valerie described a family history of severe mental illness that Eliza had never disclosed to colleagues or neighbors. Their mother had been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder following a psychotic break when Eliza was 12, resulting in both girls being placed temporarily in foster care. Eliza was determined to be nothing like our mother, Valerie explained. She refused therapy, wouldn't take medication, pretended everything was fine even when it clearly wasn't. After Cassidy was born, I noticed changes, mood swings, memory gaps, paranoia. I tried to help, but she shut me out completely about 2 years ago. This new information cast Eliza's journal in a different light. What had been presented in court as documentation of murderous intent might instead be evidence of a mind fragmenting under pressure, possibly experiencing dissociative episodes similar to her mother's condition. Spencer's investigation took another significant turn when she examined Eliza's financial records more thoroughly than had been done during the initial case preparation. Credit card statements showed consistent purchases of children's clothing, food, and hygiene products right up until Eliza's arrest. Most notably, there was a March 10th transaction at a home improvement store for items including a space heater, a portable camping toilet, and several battery-powered lights. Armed with these discoveries, Spencer approached her superior, Captain Lawrence Bridges, requesting formal reopening of the investigation. His response was immediate and negative. "The case is closed, Spencer," he told her firmly. "We have a conviction. I'm not authorizing resources to chase shadows because you've got a hunch. Let it go." Undeterred, Spencer continued her unofficial investigation during off-duty hours. She re-interviewed neighbors who had not been called as witnesses, discovering that several had seen lights moving in the Blackwood home late at night, even after Eliza had been taken into custody, observations dismissed by patrol officers as reflections or overactive imaginations. 6 days after the verdict, as Judge Mitchell prepared for the sentencing hearing, Spencer made her most significant discovery. Reviewing body camera footage from the initial search of the Blackwood residence, she noticed an officer briefly opening, then closing, what appeared to be a utility closet in the hallway. This closet had been documented in the house plans, but never thoroughly searched, as it appeared to be a shallow storage space filled with winter coats and cleaning supplies. Something about the officer's casual dismissal of this space troubled Spencer. Comparing the house's exterior dimensions with the interior floor plan, she identified a discrepancy, approximately 40 square feet unaccounted for in the original search documentation. Without departmental authorization, Spencer returned to the Blackwood home, now vacant and still sealed as a crime scene. Using her legitimate access codes, she entered alone, proceeding directly to the hallway closet. Pushing aside the hanging coats and removing the vacuum cleaner that partially blocked the back wall, she discovered what the original search team had missed: the faint outline of a door, painted to match the wall and secured with a simple hook and eye latch concealed behind the closet rod. When she opened this hidden door, Spencer found a narrow staircase leading down to what appeared to be an undocumented basement area, a space missing from the official property records and unknown even to neighbors who had occasionally visited the home. At the bottom of these stairs was another door, this one secured with a padlock. Breaking protocol, Spencer used bolt cutters from her vehicle to remove this lock. What she discovered inside would change everything about the Blackwood case. The space was small, approximately 8 by 10 feet, with no windows and a ceiling barely 6 feet high. It contained a child-sized mattress, the portable toilet and heater from Eliza's recent purchases, several bottles of water, non-perishable food items, and a stack of children's books. In the corner, curled beneath a blanket, severely malnourished but unmistakably alive, was 4-year-old Cassidy Blackwood. Spencer's training took over as she radioed for immediate medical assistance, careful to use coded language that wouldn't trigger widespread response until she had secured the scene. As paramedics rushed Cassidy to Greenfield Memorial Hospital, Spencer documented everything meticulously, knowing that what she had discovered would send shockwaves through the judicial proceeding that was about to render final judgment on Eliza Blackwood. Cassidy's condition, while serious, was not critical. Medical examination revealed malnutrition and mild dehydration, but no signs of physical abuse. Most surprisingly, the child appeared to have been receiving some level of care throughout her confinement. Regular, if inadequate, food and water, waste management, even fresh clothing. Blood tests would later confirm that the samples found in her bedroom were indeed hers, though the injury that caused the bleeding remained unexplained. As Cassidy was stabilized in the pediatric ward, Spencer faced the delicate task of questioning a traumatized 4-year-old. With a child psychologist present, she gently asked Cassidy about her time in the special room. "Mommy said I had to hide from the bad mommy," Cassidy explained, with the simple logic of a child. "She brought me food when the bad mommy was sleeping." This statement, seemingly nonsensical, would soon take on profound significance as the full complexity of the Blackwood case began to emerge. Spencer's discovery had come just in time, just 24 hours before Judge Warren Mitchell was scheduled to sentence Eliza Blackwood for a murder that, as now became clear, had never actually occurred. The detective's next steps would require careful navigation of both legal and ethical considerations. She had violated departmental protocol by conducting an unauthorized investigation and entering the Blackwood residence without proper clearance. Her discovery, while potentially exonerating Eliza of murder charges, raised disturbing new questions about child endangerment and psychological abuse. As night fell on Greenfield, Spencer placed 2 critical phone calls, first to District Attorney Hartwell, then to Defense Attorney Tyler Mercer. Both conversations were brief, focused solely on essential facts. A child believed dead had been found alive, a sentencing hearing needed to be immediately postponed, and a case that everyone had considered closed was about to reveal complexities that no one, not even Naomi Spencer herself, fully understood yet. What remained unclear, as Spencer finally allowed exhaustion to overtake her in the hospital waiting area, was whether Eliza Blackwood was a calculating criminal who had created an elaborate deception, or a profoundly ill woman whose fractured mind had created a scenario almost beyond comprehension. The answer to this question would emerge in the days to come, forcing everyone involved in the case to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, mental illness, and the often blurry line between victim and perpetrator. The morning of May 5th dawned with Greenfield in a state of collective shock. News of Cassidy Blackwood's discovery spread rapidly through the community, transforming overnight what had been considered a tragic murder case into something far more complex and unsettling. Outside the courthouse, where Eliza's sentencing had been scheduled to take place, a crowd gathered, not with the righteous anger of previous weeks, but with confused murmurs and uncertain speculation. Inside, an emergency hearing was underway in Judge Mitchell's chambers. Present were District Attorney Hartwell, Defense Attorney Mercer, Detective Spencer, and representatives from Child Protective Services. Judge Mitchell, whose stern demeanor had dominated the trial proceedings, appeared visibly shaken by the development. "Let me understand this clearly," he said, addressing Spencer directly. "The child was alive in the house throughout the entire investigation and trial? Yes, Your Honor, Spencer confirmed, in a concealed basement area that was missed during the initial search. Medical evaluation indicates Cassidy has been there for approximately 47 days, corresponding to the timeline when she was first reported missing. The implications of this discovery rippled through the room. Hartwell, whose reputation had been bolstered by the conviction, struggled to maintain his composure as the foundation of his case crumbled. Mercer, though vindicated in his insistence that proof of death was lacking, appeared equally stunned by the turn of events. Judge Mitchell turned to address the district attorney. Mr. Hartwell, given these extraordinary circumstances, what is the state's position regarding Ms. Blackwood's conviction? After a moment's hesitation, Hartwell responded with careful precision. The state acknowledges that the murder conviction cannot stand, given that the alleged victim is alive. However, we intend to pursue new charges related to child endangerment, false reporting, and obstruction of justice. The focus shifted to Cassidy's current condition and testimony. Dr. Eleanor Patel, the pediatrician overseeing Cassidy's care, reported that while the child was malnourished and exhibited signs of psychological distress, she showed no evidence of physical abuse. Most remarkably, Dr. Patel noted, Cassidy consistently refers to her mother in divided terms: good mommy who brought food and books, and bad mommy who she needed to hide from. This type of psychological compartmentalization is unusual in a child her age and suggests she was responding to dramatically different behavioral presentations from the same individual. This observation prompted Detective Spencer to share her findings regarding Eliza's family history of dissociative disorders and the pattern of contradictory behaviors observed throughout the investigation. The picture that emerged was not of a calculating killer, but of a woman experiencing severe psychological fragmentation, potentially to the point of distinct, alternating personality states. Judge Mitchell, whose previous condemnation of Eliza had been unequivocal, now faced the uncomfortable reality that he had presided over a rush to judgment. In light of these developments, he announced, I am vacating Ms. Blackwood's murder conviction and ordering an immediate comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. Within hours, the machinery of the justice system shifted direction. Eliza was transferred from county jail to Westlake Psychiatric Hospital for evaluation under court order. Cassidy, still recovering in the pediatric ward, was placed under temporary protective custody, while arrangements were made for her to stay with her Aunt Valerie. The psychiatric assessment of Eliza Blackwood was conducted by Dr. Marcus Cohen, a forensic psychiatrist specializing in dissociative disorders. Over the course of 2 weeks, through intensive interviews, psychological testing, and review of all available evidence, Cohen documented what would later be described as one of the most profound cases of dissociative identity disorder in recent clinical literature. His findings, presented to the court on May 23rd, painted a disturbing picture of a mind fractured by untreated trauma and genetic predisposition. According to Cohen, Eliza exhibited at least 2 distinct personality states: a primary identity that functioned normally in professional and social contexts, and a secondary state characterized by paranoia, aggression, and homicidal ideation specifically focused on her daughter. What makes this case particularly unusual, Dr. Cohen testified, is the apparent awareness these states had of each other. The primary personality recognized the danger posed by the secondary state and took extraordinary measures to protect Cassidy, including creating the hidden basement space as a safe room and establishing routines to provide basic care during periods of cognitive control. This explained the seemingly contradictory evidence, the journal entries documenting violent thoughts alongside continued purchases of children's supplies, the blood evidence in the bedroom from what was likely a minor injury, followed by Eliza's careful cleaning to remove any trace that might lead her alternate personality to Cassidy, the statements to police that alternately suggested knowledge of harm and concern for a missing child. Most significantly, Cohen's evaluation revealed that the triggering event, the incident in late February that neighbors had heard as screaming, likely represented a moment when the primary personality recognized that her ability to maintain control was failing. The murder that Eliza's journal referenced was not a physical act against Cassidy, but a psychological one, a desperate attempt by the primary personality to convince the secondary one that the child was already gone, thereby removing the motivation for violence. In a private room at Westlake Psychiatric Hospital, With appropriate legal and medical supervision, Detective Spencer conducted what would be the most challenging interview of her career. Seated across from Eliza, whose physical appearance had improved with proper medication and care, Spencer sought to understand the timeline from the perspective of the woman at the center of it all. "I knew something was wrong with me," Eliza explained, her voice steady but quiet. "That started about a year ago. Blackouts, finding things moved in the house, Cassidy telling me about conversations I didn't remember having with her. Then I started finding notes I'd written to myself, horrible things about Cassidy. I'd read them in my own handwriting but have no memory of writing them." As Eliza's condition deteriorated, she became increasingly aware that she represented a danger to her daughter. Unable to afford proper psychiatric care and terrified that seeking help might result in losing custody, she had attempted to manage the situation herself, with catastrophic results. "I converted the old coal cellar into a safe room," she continued. "I showed Cassidy how to use it, told her it was a game we might need to play sometimes. When things got really bad in February, when I felt like I was losing control completely, I made the decision to hide her there permanently. I faked evidence of something terrible in her bedroom, hoping that if the other me thought Cassidy was already gone, she would stop trying to hurt her. The plan, born of desperation and mental illness, had worked in preventing direct harm to Cassidy, but created a new form of endangerment. During periods of lucidity, Eliza would secretly provide food and necessities to her daughter in the hidden room. During dissociative episodes, the alternate personality remained convinced that Cassidy had been eliminated, allowing the child to survive, though in conditions of isolation and neglect that constituted their own form of abuse. When police arrested Eliza, the cycle was broken. Cassidy, trained to remain hidden and quiet, had stayed in the basement room, gradually consuming the stockpiled supplies her mother had provided. By the time Spencer discovered her, these resources were nearly exhausted. On June 2nd, a reconvened court heard final psychiatric assessments and recommendations. Dr. Cohen's conclusion was unequivocal. Ms. Blackwood represents a continued danger to her daughter, not through malicious intent, but through severe psychiatric illness that requires long-term treatment in a secure facility. However, she is not the calculating murderer portrayed during her trial, but rather a profoundly ill individual who, even in the depths of her disorder, attempted to protect her child from herself. Judge Mitchell, noticeably humbled by the case's evolution, delivered a revised ruling. The murder conviction was formally vacated. Eliza was found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect on new charges of child endangerment and false reporting. She was committed to Westlake Psychiatric Hospital for a minimum of 5 years, with annual reviews to assess her progress and continued threat level. Custody of Cassidy was awarded to her Aunt Valerie, with provisions for supervised therapeutic contact with her mother as deemed appropriate by medical professionals. The court further ordered comprehensive support services for Cassidy, acknowledging the profound trauma she had experienced and the long path to recovery that lay ahead. In a remarkable departure from judicial convention, Judge Mitchell concluded the proceedings with a formal acknowledgement of the system's failure. "This court rushed to judgment," he stated for the record. "We allowed public pressure and the horrific nature of the alleged crime to override the fundamental principle that justice requires thorough investigation and absolute certainty. Ms. Blackwood's illness went unrecognized, her daughter remained in danger, and an innocent woman nearly received a life sentence for a crime that never occurred. This outcome should serve as a sobering reminder to everyone involved in our justice system." As Eliza was led from the courtroom to begin her treatment, Detective Spencer watched with mixed emotions. The case had been solved, but not in the way anyone had anticipated. Justice had ultimately prevailed, but not before nearly failing catastrophically, and while the most immediate danger to Cassidy had passed, the long-term impact of her experience remained to be seen. What no one in that courtroom could fully appreciate was that the Blackwood case would eventually trigger significant reforms in how the Greenfield judicial system approached cases involving potential mental illness, leading to enhanced training for law enforcement, revised search protocols for missing children, and mandatory psychological evaluations in cases with unusual behavioral patterns. For Naomi Spencer, however, the most important outcome was much simpler. A child was alive who had been presumed dead, and a woman in desperate need of help would finally receive proper treatment rather than punishment. In a system often focused more on convictions than truth, these results represented a victory for the most fundamental principles of justice, principles Spencer had never stopped pursuing, even when she stood alone in her doubts. 6 months after the dramatic conclusion of the Blackwood case, the story continued to unfold in ways that reshaped understanding not just of Eliza and Cassidy's situation, but of how justice systems respond to cases involving severe mental illness. What had begun as a seemingly straightforward, if tragic, murder investigation had evolved into a landmark case studied by legal and psychiatric professionals across the country. On a crisp November morning, Detective Naomi Spencer sat in the observation room at Westlake Psychiatric Hospital, watching Dr. Marcus Cohen conduct his weekly session with Eliza Blackwood. Spencer's presence was part of an innovative, interdisciplinary approach implemented in the wake of the case, ensuring that law enforcement maintained involvement in treatment outcomes rather than simply moving on after legal proceedings concluded. The integration of consciousness has been remarkable, Dr. Cohen explained after the session, reviewing his notes with Spencer. With proper medication and intensive therapy, we've seen significant stabilization of the dissociative episodes. Ms. Blackwood now maintains awareness of her alternate state approximately 90% of the time, compared to less than 10% at admission. The psychiatric team had documented Eliza's condition with unprecedented thoroughness, partly due to its unusual presentation and partly because of the high-profile nature of the case. Brain imaging studies revealed structural and functional abnormalities consistent with severe dissociative disorders, particularly in regions responsible for memory integration and identity formation. Genetic testing confirmed what Valerie had suggested about family history. Eliza carried several genetic markers strongly associated with vulnerability to dissociative conditions. Most compelling was the forensic analysis of Eliza's journal, conducted by Dr. Samantha Reed, an expert in psycholinguistics. Reed's detailed examination revealed subtle but distinct differences in handwriting, vocabulary, and syntax between entries, consistent with alternating personality states. "What we see here isn't simply mood fluctuation," Reed reported, pointing to specific examples. The entries shift between two distinctly different writing styles, one more flowing and nurturing in tone, the other angular and hostile. Even more telling is the alternation between first-person singular when referring to Cassidy and third-person distancing language. These patterns strongly support the diagnosis of DID, rather than simply extreme mood swings or calculated deception. This analysis helped explain one of the most disturbing aspects of the case, how Eliza had maintained such contradictory behaviors without raising immediate alarm. Her primary personality, functioning at work and in limited social interactions, had become increasingly skilled at concealing the lapses in memory and awareness that occurred during transitions. Meanwhile, the secondary personality had remained focused almost exclusively on Cassidy, emerging primarily when Eliza was alone with her daughter. "It's a survival mechanism that tragically backfired," Dr. Cohen explained. The primary personality tried to protect both Cassidy and Eliza's public identity by compartmentalizing the dangerous aspects of her condition. This compartmentalization became more rigid over time until it evolved into fully dissociated states. While Eliza's treatment progressed at Westlake, Cassidy faced her own journey of recovery under the guardianship of her Aunt Valerie. Initially, the child exhibited significant symptoms of trauma, nightmares, separation anxiety, and developmental regression. Perhaps most concerning was her continued reference to her mother as two separate people, suggesting that she had internalized the dissociative framework she had witnessed. Dr. Jessica Martinez, Cassidy's child psychologist, implemented a specialized treatment plan combining play therapy, art expression, and gradually increasing structured interactions with Eliza under careful supervision. These supervised visits began with simple video calls, where Cassidy could see her mother in a stable, medicated state, and eventually progressed to monitored in-person meetings in the hospital's family therapy room. "Children are remarkably resilient," Martinez noted after one such session in late November. While Cassidy endured significant trauma, she also experienced consistent care, even in the midst of her confinement. Her mother, or at least one aspect of her mother, continued to provide food, comfort items, and emotional reassurance throughout the ordeal. This created a complex attachment rather than simple fear or rejection. The case had profound implications beyond the individuals directly involved. In response to Judge Mitchell's acknowledgement of systemic failure, the Greenfield judicial system implemented a series of reforms. These included mandatory mental health screening for defendants in serious criminal cases, enhanced training for law enforcement in recognizing signs of psychiatric disturbance, and revised protocols for child welfare investigations. Perhaps most significantly, the Blackwood case prompted a re-evaluation of how circumstantial evidence was handled in cases without definitive proof of death. The rush to judgment, fueled by public outrage, prosecutorial ambition, and judicial bias, had nearly resulted in a grave miscarriage of justice. This recognition led to the establishment of stricter evidentiary standards and mandatory cooling-off periods before certain types of serious charges could be filed. District Attorney Raymond Hartwell, whose political aspirations had been severely damaged by the case's outcome, attempted to distance himself from the initial prosecution. "We proceeded based on the evidence available at the time," he stated in a press conference that December. "No justice system is perfect, but what matters is our willingness to correct course when new information emerges." This carefully crafted statement did little to rehabilitate his reputation, particularly after internal memos surfaced showing that he had dismissed early concerns about Eliza's mental state raised by junior members of his team. By the following spring, Hartwell would announce his retirement from public service, citing personal reasons that everyone in Greenfield understood as professional fallout from the Blackwood case. Judge Warren Mitchell took a different approach, embracing his role in the system's failure with unusual candor. In a lengthy interview with the American Bar Association Journal, Mitchell spoke openly about how confirmation bias and personal reactions had influenced his handling of the case. "I allowed my emotional response as a parent to override my duty as a judge," he admitted. "The horror of what I believed had happened to that child colored every ruling I made. It's a cautionary tale for every judge. The moment you think you know what happened before all evidence has been presented, you've compromised your fundamental role in the justice system." This rare public acknowledgement of judicial error earned Mitchell both criticism and respect from his peers. While some viewed it as undermining confidence in the courts, others saw it as a necessary step toward greater accountability. Mitchell remained on the bench, but with a noticeably different approach to cases involving family dynamics and mental health considerations. For Detective Naomi Spencer, the Blackwood case represented both a professional triumph and a sobering lesson. Her persistence in questioning the official narrative had ultimately revealed the truth, but not before significant harm had been done. This experience fundamentally changed her investigative approach, leading her to establish a specialized unit within the Greenfield Police Department focused on cases involving potential mental health factors. "We're trained to look for deception," Spencer explained to a class of new detectives in January, using the Blackwood case as a teaching example. "But sometimes what looks like lying or manipulation is actually fragmentation, a mind trying to make sense of its own contradictory experiences. Our job isn't just to find evidence of guilt or innocence, but to uncover the true story, no matter how complex it might be." The most profound developments, however, occurred in the understanding of Eliza's condition itself. Dr. Cohen's detailed documentation of her case contributed significantly to psychiatric literature on dissociative identity disorder, particularly the rare variant involving awareness between alternate states. This co-conscious DID had been theorized, but rarely documented with such clarity and forensic evidence. By early spring, Eliza had progressed to the point where she could participate in a carefully structured research interview for medical professionals. With appropriate ethical safeguards and her full informed consent, she described her experience in terms that provided unprecedented insight into the subjective reality of severe dissociation. "It wasn't like becoming a different person," she explained. "It was like being trapped behind my own eyes, watching someone else use my voice and hands. I could see what was happening sometimes, but I couldn't stop it. The only thing I could do was try to create safety for Cassidy when I was present enough to act." This description, along with Eliza's journal and Dr. Reed's linguistic analysis, offered a window into a form of suffering that had previously been poorly understood, even within psychiatric circles. The case helped shift professional perspectives away from older, more skeptical views of dissociative disorders toward recognition of their neurobiological basis and legitimate clinical presentation. As winter yielded to spring, the one-year anniversary of Cassidy's discovery approached. For those closest to the case, it was a time of reflection on how a tragedy had been averted but also on the systemic failures that had allowed the situation to develop in the first place. The absence of accessible mental health care, the inadequacy of child welfare monitoring, the rush to judgment in the criminal proceedings, each represented a point where intervention might have changed the outcome. Yet amidst these sobering reflections, there were also signs of healing. Cassidy, now 5 years old and preparing to enter kindergarten, had regained much of her developmental trajectory. While she would likely require ongoing therapeutic support, her resilience had surprised even the specialists working with her. Eliza, though still residing at Westlake under court order, had progressed to the point of participating in structured day programs and contributing to group therapy sessions for others with dissociative disorders. Her alternate personality state, while not completely integrated, had been largely contained through a combination of medication, cognitive techniques, and constant vigilance. The relationship between mother and daughter remained complex, but was gradually being rebuilt under professional guidance. Their supervised visits, initially tense and confusing, had evolved into more natural interactions as Cassidy came to understand, in age-appropriate terms, the nature of her mother's illness. "Mommy's brain gets sick sometimes, but doctors are helping her get better," Cassidy explained to her Aunt Valerie after one such visit, showing a child's remarkable capacity to simplify and accept difficult realities. This statement, recounted to Detective Spencer during a follow-up meeting with the family, perhaps best captured the heart of the Blackwood case. A story not of calculated evil, but of illness unrecognized and untreated until it reached a breaking point. It served as a reminder that behind many of the cases that shock communities and dominate headlines, there often lies a more complex human reality than the initial narrative suggests. As spring turned towards summer, with Eliza continuing her treatment and Cassidy preparing for her new school, Greenfield itself was changed by the case that had briefly made it the center of national attention. The community had been forced to confront uncomfortable questions about mental illness, about the reliability of its justice system, and about how quickly certainty could form around a story that was ultimately proven false. These lessons, painful as they were, represented progress of a sort, a movement toward a more nuanced understanding of human behavior and the many factors that shape it. The truth that had emerged from the Blackwood case was far more complex than anyone had initially imagined, but in that complexity lay the possibility of genuine understanding and, perhaps eventually, something approaching justice. 3 years after the discovery that upended Greenfield's understanding of the Blackwood case, the long-term implications continued to unfold across multiple systems: legal, medical, and social. What had begun as a shocking local crime story had evolved into a case study examined in law schools, psychiatric residency programs, and child welfare training throughout the country. More importantly, it had fundamentally changed the lives of everyone directly involved. On a warm June morning in 2026, the Greenfield County Courthouse hosted an unusual hearing. Unlike the tense, crowded proceedings of 3 years earlier, this session was conducted with minimal publicity in Judge Karen Abernathy's chambers. Judge Mitchell, having recused himself from any further involvement with the case, had been replaced by Abernathy, known for her background in family court and mental health law. Present were District Attorney Leslie Morales, Hartwell's successor, Defense Attorney Tyler Mercer, now working with a specialized legal clinic focused on mental health cases, Dr. Marcus Cohen, and Detective Naomi Spencer. Eliza Blackwood sat quietly beside Mercer, her appearance markedly different from the disheveled, disconnected woman who had first appeared in court 3 years earlier. At 37, with proper medication and intensive therapy, she presented as composed and fully present, though the strain of her experiences remained visible in her careful movements and watchful eyes. The purpose of the hearing was to evaluate Eliza's progress and consider modifications to her court-ordered treatment plan. Dr. Cohen presented a comprehensive assessment documenting remarkable improvement in her condition. Over the past 3 years, he testified, Ms. Blackwood has achieved what we consider stable integration of consciousness. Through a combination of pharmacological intervention and specialized therapy, the severe dissociative episodes have been reduced to manageable fluctuations that Ms. Blackwood can now recognize and address before they escalate. She maintains consistent awareness of her emotional states and has developed effective strategies for crisis management. Brain imaging studies now showed normalized patterns of activity in previously disrupted regions, and psychological testing revealed significant improvement in memory integration and identity cohesion. Most importantly, Eliza had maintained this stability for 14 consecutive months, without any serious regression, the longest period of consistent functioning since her initial diagnosis. While dissociative identity disorder is considered a chronic condition, Cohen concluded, Ms. Blackwood represents one of our most successful treatment outcomes. She has progressed from requiring 24-hour secure hospitalization to functioning effectively in our step-down residential program with 12-hour supervision. It is my professional opinion that she is ready for transition to a community-based treatment setting with appropriate support services. District Attorney Morales, approaching the case with none of Hartwell's political baggage, focused her questions on public safety considerations. Dr. Cohen, what is your assessment of Ms. Blackwood's current risk level regarding potential harm to her daughter or others? With continued medication compliance and ongoing therapy, I consider that risk to be minimal, Cohen responded. Ms. Blackwood has developed significant insight into her condition and demonstrates consistent commitment to her treatment plan. Furthermore, she has established a robust support network and accountability structure that would likely identify any concerning changes before they became dangerous. Mercer then called Eliza herself to speak, a moment that carried echoes of her disastrous testimony 3 years earlier, but under dramatically different circumstances. When Judge Abernathy invited her to address the court, Eliza spoke clearly and directly, without the fragmentation that had characterized her previous court appearances. I understand that I will always need treatment, she stated. I accept that my illness created a situation that endangered my daughter, regardless of my intentions. What I'm asking for today isn't freedom from responsibility, but the opportunity to continue my recovery in a setting that allows me to rebuild some semblance of a life, not just for myself, but eventually, in whatever limited way is appropriate, for Cassidy as well. Judge Abernathy considered all testimony carefully before rendering her decision. Based on the comprehensive evidence presented regarding Ms. Blackwood's treatment progress, this court finds sufficient grounds to modify the original commitment order. Ms. Blackwood is hereby transferred from inpatient psychiatric commitment to a supervised community placement program with the following conditions. These conditions included continued medication management, weekly therapy sessions, random wellness checks, and strict limitations on unsupervised contact with minors, including Cassidy. Any violation would result in immediate return to inpatient status. The arrangement represented a careful balance between acknowledging Eliza's progress and maintaining appropriate safeguards. As the hearing concluded, Detective Spencer approached Eliza, their first direct interaction outside the controlled environment of Westlake Hospital. I'm glad to see how far you've come, Spencer said simply. Eliza nodded. You saved my daughter's life and mine in a different way. I've wanted to thank you properly for a long time. This brief exchange reflected the unusual bond that had formed between investigator and subject, a connection rooted in Spencer's willingness to question assumptions and seek deeper truths. The detective who had once suspected Eliza of murder had become an unexpected advocate for her recovery, regularly consulting on the psychiatric unit's approach to patients with legal involvement. Meanwhile, across town, 7-year-old Cassidy Blackwood was completing her second-grade year at Greenfield Elementary. Under her Aunt Valerie's guardianship, she had developed into a resilient, though somewhat reserved, child. Regular therapy had helped her process her traumatic experiences, and careful, age-appropriate explanations had given her a framework for understanding her mother's illness without internalizing blame or fear. Cassidy's school records noted her as academically advanced, socially cautious, with particular strengths in reading and art. Her teachers observed occasional anxiety and hypervigilance, lasting effects of her early trauma, but also remarkable adaptability and emotional intelligence beyond her years. A comprehensive developmental assessment conducted on her 7th birthday had found her functioning within normal parameters across all major domains, with only mild, persistent trauma symptoms. The relationship between mother and daughter had evolved gradually and carefully over the 3 years since their separation. Beginning with short, supervised visits at Westlake, they had progressed to longer interactions as Eliza's condition stabilized. These meetings, always conducted under professional observation, had gradually helped rebuild a connection that had been profoundly damaged by Eliza's illness and Cassidy's subsequent confinement. Dr. Jessica Martinez, who continued to work with Cassidy, had documented this delicate process of reconnection. "We observe a healthy caution in Cassidy," she noted in her case files, "but not terror or rejection. She has developed an age-appropriate understanding of her mother's illness as something separate from her mother's core identity, a crucial distinction that allows for potential relationship repair without endangering her own emotional security." The impact of the Blackwood case extended far beyond the immediate family. In the 3 years since its resolution, Greenfield had implemented significant reforms across multiple systems, many spearheaded by those directly involved in the case. Judge Mitchell, true to his public acknowledgement of error, had established a judicial education initiative focused on cognitive bias in legal proceedings. Before his retirement in early 2026, he had trained over 200 judges across the state on recognizing and mitigating the influence of personal reactions and assumptions, using his own failures in the Blackwood case as a powerful teaching example. The Greenfield Police Department, under Spencer's guidance, had developed specialized protocols for cases involving potential mental health factors. Every officer now received basic training in recognizing signs of psychiatric disturbance, and a dedicated mental health response team worked collaboratively with community mental health services to address situations before they escalated to criminal concerns. Perhaps most significantly, the case had triggered a comprehensive review of child welfare practices at both local and state levels. The fact that Cassidy's concerning medical history had never triggered a coordinated investigation revealed critical gaps in communication between healthcare providers, schools, and child protective services. New reporting requirements and cross-system alerts had been implemented to identify patterns of concern that might be missed when viewed as isolated incidents. Public Defender Tyler Mercer had leveraged his experience with the case to secure funding for specialized legal representation for defendants with mental illness. His mental health defense project now ensured that individuals like Eliza received appropriate assessment and advocacy from the earliest stages of criminal proceedings, rather than being processed through a system ill-equipped to recognize or address their conditions. By mid-2026, these various reform efforts had coalesced into what became known informally as the Blackwood Protocols, a set of integrated approaches for cases involving the intersection of mental health, child welfare, and criminal justice. These protocols emphasized comprehensive assessment, cross-system communication, and appropriate diversion to treatment when indicated, all while maintaining necessary protections for public safety and child welfare. On a personal level, many of those involved had experienced significant transformation. Detective Spencer had been promoted to lead the department's newly established Specialized Victims Unit, focusing on cases involving mental illness, developmental disabilities, and other complex factors. Her handling of the Blackwood case was now taught at the State Police Academy as an example of investigative persistence and the importance of questioning even seemingly obvious conclusions. Dr. Cohen had published several papers on Eliza's case, with appropriate anonymization and consent, contributing valuable insights to the psychiatric literature on dissociative disorders. The detailed documentation of her treatment and recovery provided rare longitudinal data on the effectiveness of integrated approaches to severe dissociation. Former District Attorney Hartwell had left Greenfield entirely, relocating to Florida, where he established a private practice focused on civil litigation. His successor, Leslie Morales, had implemented significant reforms in the prosecutor's office, including mandatory review processes for cases built primarily on circumstantial evidence and improved procedures for considering mental health factors in charging decisions. As summer progressed, Eliza settled into her new living arrangement at Horizon House, a supervised residential facility for individuals transitioning from psychiatric hospitalization to community living. The modest apartment provided more independence than she had experienced in years, while maintaining the structure and support necessary for continued stability. She secured part-time employment as an administrative assistant at a local non-profit organization that had partnered with Westlake on vocational rehabilitation for patients. On a warm Saturday in July, Eliza participated in her first unsupervised activity with Cassidy, a carefully planned 2-hour visit to a public park, with Valerie remaining nearby but not directly observing their interaction. This milestone, approved by the treatment team and family court after extensive preparation, represented a tentative step toward normalizing their relationship. As mother and daughter sat together on a park bench, sharing an ice cream cone and watching ducks on the pond, Cassidy asked a question that caught Eliza by surprise. "Mom, are you still scared of turning into the bad mommy?" The directness of the question, reflecting both a child's bluntness and Cassidy's unusual insight into her mother's condition, momentarily left Eliza speechless. After gathering herself, she responded with the honest simplicity that had become the foundation of their healing relationship. "Sometimes I worry about it," she acknowledged, "but I have medicine that helps my brain stay together now, and doctors who teach me how to notice if things start feeling wrong. And I have people like Aunt Valerie and Dr. Cohen who check on me all the time to make sure I'm okay." Cassidy considered this with serious concentration before nodding acceptance. "That's good," she said finally, "because I like this you." This exchange, later recounted to the treatment team, captured both the progress made and the distance yet to travel. The Blackwood case would never have a perfect resolution. Too much harm had occurred, too many systems had failed, too many lives had been permanently altered. But within these imperfections lay something valuable: a community's capacity to learn from failure, a system's ability to reform, and a family's remarkable resilience in the face of extraordinary circumstances. 3 years after the case that had shocked Greenfield and briefly captured national attention, justice had been reconsidered in its fullest sense, not simply as punishment for wrongdoing, but as the complex, ongoing process of addressing harm, supporting recovery, and creating safeguards against future failure. In this broader understanding of justice, the Blackwood case represented not an ending, but a continuing journey toward a more nuanced, more humane approach to the complexities of human behavior and the systems designed to address it. As summer faded into autumn, with Cassidy beginning 3rd grade and Eliza continuing her careful reintegration into community life, their story remained a powerful reminder that behind the sensational headlines and simplified narratives that often dominate public discourse about crime and punishment, there exist human realities of profound complexity, realities that demand not just judgment, but understanding, not just accountability, but compassion, not just closure, but ongoing commitment to something closer to true justice.